medicine we're going to talk about is Aconitum Napellus. We all know that Aconite is one of the very common medicine in homeopathic universe. It's belong to the Ranunculaceae family, and its common name is monkshood. Let's first see its constitution. Now, in constitution, it says generally indicated in acute or recent cases occurring in young persons, especially girls full of plethoric habit who lead a sedentary life. That means aconite mostly indicated in case of acute onset. We know acute and chronic disease. Chronic disease have certain parameters and other definitions, and acute disease have sudden onset. So aconite is a short-acting remedy, and where there is sudden and violentness, we'll think about aconite. And particularly in young girls who lead a sedentary life and has a plethoric habit. Plethoric habit means who is mostly uh, bulky, mostly muscular, mostly have a rigid, healthy personality or healthy figure. That means he is physically one term of healthy. Now, sedentary life means he do not spend much time with physical activity. Mostly he or she involved in in a professions where there is mostly mental works, not much of physical works. It may be doctors, maybe uh, other professions like IT industries, or it may be software engineers, or maybe anything where there are mental work is more necessary than the physical activity. And that is why patient has a plethoric habit. And along with that, patient immunity is much more higher. His susceptibility is less, and that is the reason he do not usually suffer from easy diseases, or he do not have easy tendency to catch any disease. Rather, his immunity is good. But aconite is applicable on those person only. Now, whenever they get sick, they get it violently. So often patients come to you, or patient's mother come to you and says, my child immunity is good. He do not catch that much of cold easily, but whenever he gets, particularly this time, it becomes a very high fever. But these person easily affected by atmospheric changes. That means whenever there is huge 180-degree changes in the atmosphere, that means there was cold, but suddenly the cold increased so much that patients suffer from common cold, fever, coryza, cough, and all those symptoms. And uh, with violent intensity. So this indicates aconite. Dark hair and eyes, rigid muscular fiber. That also indicates how muscular and bulky a patient can be, how healthy a patient can be. Next, come to the mental general. One of the most important symptom is great fear and anxiety of mind with great nervous excitability, afraid to go out, to go into a crowd where there is any excitement or many people to cross the street. Aconite patient has great fear and great anxiety. Now that fear and anxiety is quite different from the other drugs, because the fear and anxiety of aconite patient is totally baseless. Even though it is not a case of too much worried, but patient still in fear, still thought about many things that are going to happen, or still thinking about the disease, which is very trivial. Even the patient is quite extroverted. The patient have mental restlessness, afraid. He has afraid to go out to mixed with the people in the crowd where there is any excitement. He avoid all the social gatherings and everything. Even he fear of crossing the street. Now, this fear of crowd is also known as in medicine as agoraphobia. So this is also is here in aconite. Second is the countenance is expressive of fear. Now, how the fear is, how much intensified is the fear, you can easily guess it from the countenance as the facial expression of the patient. The life is rendered miserable by fear. The fear is too much greater that patient's life becomes very much difficult to lead. Is sure his disease will prove fatal. Even he is assured himself that my disease will kill me, even though doctors has promised him that it is a very trivial, a minor illness, you don't need to worry much. But still, patient do not listen but himself. Predicts the day he will die. Even he start predicting hours, start predicting days, that how much he is going to live on earth. Fear of death during pregnancy. Third point is restless, anxious, does everything in great haste, must change positions, often everything startles him. Now the patient is very anxious, and that is the reason, but patient leads a sedentary life too. So that means patient do not, patient sleep in a bed or lying in a bed, he will change the position from left to right, but will not uh, walk or will not sit. That usually arsenic patient does, but aconite patient mentally are too much restless. Next is Hahnemann says, whenever aconite is chosen homeopathically, you must above all observe the moral symptoms and be careful that it closely resembles them, the anguish of mind and body, the restlessness that is quite not to be allayed. Now Hahnemann says, whenever you think it is a case of aconite, you above all the symptoms you must be looking for is the moral symptoms. That is his fear and anxiety, mental restlessness, the mental anxiety, worriedness, even with the trivial ailment. These are the symptoms you must be looking for. And be careful, it closely resembles them, because there are so much medicine with fear and anxiety, but it must be a baseless fear. It must be a baseless anxiety, even though it is not necessary to do. So it must resemble the aconite completely. It must be a perfect match. If it is, then aconite will cure the case simply. The anguish of mind and body must be there. The restlessness, the disquiet, it is not something that it can easily be diminished or decreased. It is always with the patient. So you must pay attention to these symptoms. Now, lastly, the music is unbearable, makes her sad. Aconite patients, whenever he needs fear, then everything startles him, which is natural. We see when a patient lying down in a night with in winter, if there is nothing, the patient sleeps quite well. But if there is a slight sound outside, even though he knows there is no one in this house except him, then he start getting afraid. And afterwards, a little uh, sound from pins or needles or sound from any other cats or dogs can create a huge fear in that person. So similarly, aconite patients are always in fear, and resulting of which, whenever there is something, some noise or some changes uh, in his environment, that causes much more fears and anxiety to him. So music is unbearable, or any kind of noises are unbearable. Next, come to the physical general. It says complaints caused by exposure to dry cold wind. That is very important. It must be dry, not a wet. It's not a rainy season. It must be cold season or in the summer season where there is extreme change of atmosphere suddenly. Dry northwest winds or exposure to draughts of cold air while in a perspiration. So patient in perspiration stage, dry cold winds come, their cause checked perspiration, and afterwards complaint begins, but with the suddenness and violentness. That is the case of aconite. For the congestive stage of inflammation before localization takes place, that means even even before the first stage of inflammation, you can think of aconite, which is very difficult to get. But yes, aconite do well in that scenarios too. Pains are intolerable, they drive him crazy. He becomes very restless at night. Usually, aconite has aggravation towards night. It starts from the evening and then grows gradually. Similarly, the pains are also like that. It may be toothache, it may be other pains, which basically drives patient crazy with fear and anxiety. So then we can think of Aconitum Napellus. So this was all about the mental symptoms and physical symptoms, that is the constitution. So we also know that in acute cases, if you get this physical and mental makeup, which is very often can be found in case of aconite, you must take them. And these are the interesting, and these are the indicating factors for aconitum napellus. So now come to the particular symptoms. First, to the amenorrhea, that is female reproductive system. In plethora young girls, after fright to prevent suppression of menses. Very important. Amenorrhea, as we all know, there is primary and there is secondary. Primary amenorrhea means the menarche is late. Menarche is late. That means the first onset of menstruation in a female body is delayed even after 15 or 16 years of age. So this is due to any reason. This is called primary amenorrhea. We are not talking about primary amenorrhea. We are talking about most the secondary amenorrhea, where a patient has good menstruation, physical menstruation, but suddenly due to any reason the patient has not menstruate 4 to 6 months. Usually secondary amenorrhea we consider clinically if it is more than 6 months. So in that case you have to find out what happened to that person, what are the underlying physical or mental disease that is basically causing the amenorrhea. Now let's assume there are no physical disease. Then what occurs when you take the history? You find there is a fright, there is a fear. Now the patient comes to you and says, 6 months before or 7 months before, my father and mother, my parents had a big fight, and resulting of which my father was so angry that I was so scared of him, and I get into the room and lock the door. And whenever patient says that it is not some simple fear, you find out that this fear has really, really taking over her, and that is the reason his facial expression, that is his countenance, is expressive of fear. it is very it is very important to get this kind of fright, and that fright basically creates amenorrhea. It suppresses the hormonal uh, cycle. It changes the hormonal regulations, and even it can be found in patients. uh, let's say a 17-18-year-old goes to a school or college and teacher scold her so badly that he was so so afraid of the person. She stopped menstruating afterwards, and that kind of symptoms we can think of Aconitum Napellus. So in that case, to bring the menstruation back, we must think of Aconitum Napellus. Next, go to the respiratory system, the cough. It may be a wet cough, that is group laryngotracheobronchitis, the whole respiratory system with phlegm, increase a sputum secretion. This is dry, it may be dry, and as we all know, there must be a violent cough, so whole suffocating, loud, or any kind of croaking, hard, rough, ringing, whistling, any kind of but violent cough, which aggravates on expiration. Whenever patients going to talk, then patients cough, like caustic cough, and reverses spontaneous acid during inhalation. And the causation is from dry cold winds or drafts of air. So if you get the history of patient with a checked perspiration and violent cough, and with patient have count fear or some kind of anxiety, and asking physicians too many times that is it fatal, will it be cured easily, sir, or will it cause difficulties, can I cure within 5 days? Like these questions that indicates he is in fear, then you think about aconite, and that is mostly on acute cases, not in chronic cough. Next, come to the nervous system. On rising from a recumbent positions, the face become deathly pale, or he becomes faint, giddy, and falls. Now, that may be lower of BP, or maybe lower of sugar, or maybe due to any convulsion. It may be minor strokes, everything. But it do not makes the patient fully unconscious. There is still consciousness. The patient feels that he falls, but he fears to rise again, because this after the fall, patient becomes so much afraid of the scenario that he fears to rise again. He thoughts that if I wake up, I can fall again, and that will be this time I may be saved by God, but next time I will not. So that fears transforms these symptoms to cure by aconite, often accompanied by vanishing of sight and unconsciousness. Next, the convulsions of teething children. So, particularly during the teething process, if there is convulsions or any kind of fits or any seizure, heat jerks and twitches of single muscle. Child often gnaws, frets, and screams. In that case, we find the fear in the mouth, fear in the face, and along with it is violent convulsions. Then you can think of Aconitum Napellus with high fever and dry hot skin. Next is fever. Fever is skin dry and hot, face red, pale, red alternately, burning thirst for large quantities of cold water. That is important. Usually, Aconite patients do not drink very much of water. It is moderate, but whenever he is in fever, he wants cold water only, and he has insatiable thirst. That means his thirst cannot be satiable. So, intense nervous restlessness, along with the mental restlessness, tossing about agony, becomes intolerable towards evening, as we have already discussed. These aggravations usually occur in evening and towards night also, whenever when going to sleep. So, at a night, he has aggravation of fever, temperature usually come there, usually not perspire much, wants cold water much, and this mental anxiety and restlessness, fear, even though doctors checked her, or he says she continue says that I might die this winter, like this. So in that fever, we can think of aconite. Now that aconite fever must have the fear and the onset and the violentness, then we can consider fever. Otherwise, to simply control fever, we should never aconite be given and never alternate with other drugs in that purpose. If it be a case of requiring aconite that I have already discussed, those symptoms must be there. It must resembles the aconite. Then aconite will cure the case. No other drugs are necessary. Unless indicated the exciting cause, always nearly injuries in the first stage of typhoid fever. So usually typhoid fever we do not prescribe aconite, but if it is due to checked perspiration, if it is on the sedentary life, plethoric person with violent and fear and anxiety, you can think, but otherwise do not think about aconite in typhoid fever. Next, the modalities, as we already discussed, evening and night aggravations are there, pains are insupportable, warm room is not preferred, and when rising from bed, lying on affected side, there is also aggravation. Amelioration in open air, like pulsatile albumin. Next, come to the relation. In relation, it has said that complementary to coffea in fever. After coffea, you can think of also in sleeplessness, in intolerance of pain, in arnica in traumatism. After arnica, you can think of aconite. In sulfur, all cases, whenever you have given sulfur, you can think of aconite. Rarely indicated in fever which brings out eruptions, so we will not prescribe aconite in eruptive fevers. And aconite is the acute of sulfur, and both precede and follow it in acute inflammatory condition. That is very important. So if it is an acute inflammatory conditions, if you have given sulfur, you can think of aconite next without any hesitations, and the vice versa. So this was all about Aconitum Napellus. We must remember the fear and anxiety part, the violent and suddenness. We can prescribe aconite, and it is usually and easily prescribed in very commonly prescription in homeopathic universe. So this was all. If you have any memorable case regarding aconite, you can let me know in the comment section. We'll meet soon. Thank you.